Today's video is sponsored by Squarespace. Well, hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. So, this has been a highly requested video that I've been very nervous to make, and it's all about annotating my books. I've been annotating books since I went to university over a decade ago, and how I annotate books and why I annotate books has changed ever so slightly over the years, though not too much. However, I've been really nervous to make this video, primarily because I'm not an aesthetic note taker. If you're looking for someone who has these beautiful little notebooks and pretty notes with all these gorgeously laid bullet journals with their notes all colour coordinated, and beautiful handwriting scribbled in the margins looking incredibly aesthetic, I am not the person for you. This is about how I take notes as someone who is, really busy, and I really don't have the time to sit there and think about the aesthetics of note-taking. I think about the purpose of why I'm note-taking. I don't have an aesthetic bone in my body, as it were. I'm not that kind of person. And on top of that, I'm also dyslexic and neurodivergent. So this is how I take notes in my books as someone who's a little bit weird. So to do this, I've used my example, the book that I'm working on currently for my PhD, which is a proof copy of Charlotte Higgins's Greek Myths, A New Retelling. As you can see, I've written throughout it. There is no neat and tidiness about where I've doodled, where I've scribbled. Some are far more brutal than others. The beginning of my Helen section, for example, just demonstrates how messy I am. But we are going to talk about why I do it like this, and about the benefits I experience by doing it like this and not overthinking how I am using my books as a notebook, as it were. So obviously, if you're annotating in books, it entirely depends on why you're doing it. I'm coming at this perspective from someone who is analysing the text for academic purposes. I tend to only do this for books that I'm really annotating. If it's a book that I'm just enjoying for fun, and with those books, I tend to use a very gentle sticky tab that I just write inside the sticky tab, not in the margins, because there are a lot of my books I want to preserve and keep them looking nice and neat and revisit at a later date. But with books like this, so books which I am just ripping apart for research purposes, I'm not going to be gentle with them. I use highlighter pens, I use ink, I accidentally tear the pages sometimes. I'm not gentle with the books that I annotate. So there is no consideration in terms of that. I would never annotate a book that is, aesthetically pleasing. It's a rare copy. I say that I did accidentally highlight a book that had been signed by Salman Rushdie, and I wasn't aware of it at the time when I was researching it. I got it secondhand at a bookshop, thinking, it's only £2, and it was a signed copy of the Satanic Verses before he went into exile. So yes, there are errors in judgment to sometimes annotating your books, but normally I go for a cheap second-hand copy or a proof that I can annotate. I don't tend to buy new books when I'm annotating unless it's specifically for my research, like a non-fiction book that I'm purely annotating, and I know I would not read this for leisure in any shape or form. Like I wouldn't read about Greek history of weaving for leisure, so therefore I'm going to write all over it. But before we go into my note-taking, I like to take a quick moment to thank today's sponsor, which is Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one website platform for entrepreneurs to stand out and succeed online. Whether you're just starting out or managing a growing brand, Squarespace makes it easy to create a beautiful website, engage with your audience, and sell anything from products to content to time, all in one place, all on your terms. You can design a gorgeous, unique, and professional-looking website tailored to your brand thanks to Squarespace Blueprint. And with Squarespace's integrated optimized SEO tools, you can get your new website launched and discovered quickly. And you don't need to know anything about coding, thanks to Squarespace's next-generation website editor, Fluid Engine, which lets you drag and drop your content where you want it on a desktop or mobile. And if you're a freelancer who wants to launch your own courses, whether they're courses on art or personal training, then Squarespace is the place for you. You can just upload your videos onto Squarespace and then add a paywall, set your own price, and charge either a one-time fee or sell subscriptions, whatever works best for your brand. So if you want to expand your business or just build a beautiful website for your blogging leisure, then head to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/lady of the library to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. So let me break down my process to annotating books and how I go about it. So because I tend to go into a book with a research idea first, I know what I'm potentially looking for, but also I'm open to it. So the things when I'm reading a book for a first time, I'm looking for patterns, I'm looking for recognition, I'm looking for things that match my theory, and I'm looking for things that go against my theory. But what those are, when I'm first approaching a book cold, blind as it were, I do not know. So I have on me a plan. What I arm myself with are little coloured sticky tabs, which will eventually form a key, which I keep at the front of the book at all times. I don't have this key pre-prepared. I create the key as I go along and pick it up, and then I tab according to the key. The key is entirely based on my personal themes of research. I tend to build them as I go along. I have no idea what they're going to be when I first start off, because I don't know what the book has to offer. It may offer nothing, which is why I don't create a pre-prepared key before I go into a book. I tend to be very selective when it comes to highlighting. The purpose of highlighting is to find the quote quickly when I want to type it up somewhere. That's usually in a Notion page or Obsidian, whichever program I'm using. Sometimes it's just directly into the Google Drive document itself that I'm working on. But at the beginning, I tend to be more heavy-handed with highlighting, but I tend to also color code the highlight. So if I'm reading a passage and a new idea starts halfway through a paragraph, I will change the color of the highlighter. If the passage continues to talk on the same discussion, I tend to keep the same color highlighter as I've done on this double page, but I break down and summarize what that passage is about, so I know precisely what we're keying in on. Even though the theme is the same and they tend to be discussing the same topic, I need to know exactly what she's discussing in each paragraph. So giving a little note to myself about what potentially is happening in this paragraph gives me a quick glance that will save me in the future of trying to exactly find that quote, or read the double page just to find the section about this topic in which I'm discussing. I allow myself the freedom when I'm analysing to write down any thoughts I have on my first reading, and I found myself surprised by myself sometimes when I come to a rereading and I didn't come up with that idea the second time. I've been doing this text for over a year now, and I'm come back to a chapter that I haven't touched for over a year. I think it was January last year I started writing a section of a chapter. I've come back to that character and I was shocked at some of the things I took out from that character. I thought, oh, actually that's a really interesting thought that I didn't think of when I approach the text now. And I allow myself to have the freedom to write down any thoughts in my first reading, because if you don't write them, you will lose them. And I find writing them in the text itself is the safest, securest place I can put them, because sometimes they can get lost. They can get lost on Notion, they can get lost in a notebook, so you don't know which notebook you've written it in. Writing them down in the margins as you come along the theme, so you go, I like this theme, pop it in there. It's the most efficient way I find when I'm collating organic my first thoughts. I tend to focus entirely on how I think this can be interpreted, what theory this can be applied to, and I highlight accordingly, and then obviously thematically. I find when I'm taking notes in the book to be as specific as possible, and I would advise other students to do the same. Like if you're doing, say, a book about the First World War poetry, you can't just highlight a tab and call it war or trauma. You have to be specific, and more specific you are, the more useful your text becomes in the future. So say if you are looking at war trauma, you can be looking at war trauma from a male's perspective, looking at war trauma from someone who was a nurse or a soldier. Be as specific as possible when you're highlighting themes. Things like love is too broad, and you may find that you want to adapt your key as you go along. So the more specific you are, the more then you can diversify. I used to, when I was beginning as a student, I used to read a whole book originally and decide to type up all the quotes so I could have them all digitized. And that process does seem efficient if you're doing it full time, and if you have the free time to do it. As someone who does not have the free time to do that anymore, and it turns out a lot of the quotes aren't relevant, I have dismissed that entirely. I no longer type up everything from a book that I think is relevant, because it's not really relevant. A lot of the things that I thought were relevant are not relevant, and things that I didn't think were relevant. So I find keeping everything contained within the book, the primary text as it were, more sufficient. And then when it comes to writing up something in particular, I rely on this as my source rather than a digital space. I do that because it's just less time consuming, in all honesty, and it doesn't all become relevant. When it comes to researching, obviously there's always then the risk of you losing the book, for goodness sake. So I'm very careful with my books, but obviously that's always a massive risk. Please make sure that you always check when you're leaving a library or a cafe or a friend's house that you have your book with you, but it's like anything. It's like backing up all of your data. That's what the cloud are for, etc. But being able to keep revisiting the book and seeing your old notes from a year or 2 years ago and then actually adding to it is a bonus. I have found personally now, after doing this many times, I find it easier to write in blue pen. So oftentimes I don't have a blue pen with me and I resent it entirely because the contrast with black ink isn't good enough for my dyslexia. So I prefer writing in blue biro. So here's a perfect example. The notes that I've taken in blue highlight themselves far more significantly. If you're someone who has larger handwriting, then sticky notes are more applicable. I find sticky notes quite irritating because it blocks a lot of the text. What I love about a lot of these very thin line ones, or oftentimes there are tabs such as this one, which I will showcase to you now, which I've seen, which have a clear body, so they're not blocking the text. What I find the most irritating when I'm researching is having to move things out of the way so I can read the organic text, because my notes are never as important as the organic text itself. And I find almost when I write in blue ink, they're not as distracting when I'm reading the core body of the text. You may even find other inks better. You may find writing in red or purple or pink to be your preference to it. The key to note-taking, in my opinion, is always writing down why you have highlighted something. Don't just highlight for the sake of it. Summarize why you have highlighted this thing. So argue why you have damaged your book. When you're note-taking, you have to give a good enough reason as to why you have just damaged this page. And I'm using the term damage because a lot of people see it as damaging. I don't see it as damaging personally, unless it was a rare book. But you have to argue your cause as to why that has been highlighted, because I can guarantee you sometimes you come across something and go, why did I highlight that even a week ago, let alone in a PhD where you're doing this over potentially, you know, for me it's an 8-year period where I'll be working on this project. I am not going to remember why I highlighted that. So giving your thoughts or opinions or what theme you may think this falls under, and just giving a brief explanation, even if it's just a key term. And if you are someone with big handwriting, you may also find using another key as a shorthand key as well. So with your sticky tab key, I haven't done it with this book in particular, but I have in the past done a shorthand key. So where I mean something as a phrase or a theory, I've just used a certain letter or a shape, and then I've had a key at the beginning of the text to showcase what I mean by that. So it's easy for me to flip back and forth, and it gives me more real estate within the margins of the book to express what that means. If I have to use a sticky note, like a big sticky note, I haven't really used one in this text. I've used a sticky note and I popped it at the beginning of the page. Now again, these are quite useless if you don't reference what it is exactly this is for. So I tend to use the space at the beginning so there's no blockage of the actual text body, or using the end space at the end of a chapter to write up notes. So oftentimes there will be space at the end or a whole page here. Utilize the white spaces more than anything, but always include your page numbers. So if you are commenting on something that you didn't have enough space for, say in this margin, and you want to use the space here, you obviously always make sure you have a symbol of some kind, and then your notes and the page number. So I will always use the blank spaces more than I will sticky tabs, purely for the whole, you know, when it comes to researching, sticky tabs can come out quite easily. So that's also why I don't really use them anymore, because if a sticky tab falls out, you've got no idea where it belonged to. So using the actual body of the book is far more efficient in my opinion, because you just can't risk losing it. It won't fall out, it won't get bent, it won't dry up the sticky glue. So the more sticky tabs you have that are thick, the pages won't close, so you're more at risk of losing them. If you really want to secure your notebooks down, this is the only thing I found this thing good for, is washi tape. So to extra secure your sticky tabs that you have in there, like large ones, use a bit of washi tape over it to try and extra secure it. But again, that just adds more bulk. If you can use the pages of the book itself as your notebook rather than using sticky tabs, I can guarantee you will find it far more efficient, and it'll be less scary of losing a note, because trust me, they fall out. I've done this a long time. I've seen many a sticky tab go, which book did you belong to? Because once it's fallen out and you have no idea, if you have multiple books in your bag and a sticky tab falls out and you've just got no clue what it's referring to, it's wasted notes, it's wasted ideas. But yes, many people have asked me how I take notes in my books. That's how I do it. Again, I'm not as fanatical about doing it as unless I'm really studying the text. It's something that I reserve for when I'm going deep. I'm not doing it all the time when I'm reading for fun. I'm certainly not doing it for every text that I do. My main advice is to really be specific about what you are tagging when you're using a key at the beginning, and use as many colour sticky notes as you can get. And even if you run out, because you're doing that many themes and you run out of colours, then add a symbol to it. So you can put the word here and then also add symbols, so you distinguish between two types of pink. It'll be really irritating. My advice is to just change the type of sticky tab you're using. So as you can see here, I've used a different one compared to the others below. Things like that will really speed up your process, particularly and I would advise it just, the more specific you can get in the actual core text, the easier it will be when it comes to researching or writing something, because I can guarantee you will need to keep referring to this over many years if you're doing, say, a PhD, and you won't remember. There are some translucent sticky notes, they're less irritating, and also pastel coloured highlighter pens. I will link both those down below that I've bought online. Those links will be affiliate links, so just so you know, if you do purchase them, they will support my channel. But I hope you found that helpful. I'm sorry it's not aesthetically pretty, but I hope you found it practical in some way. Obviously this isn't a scripted video. I'm leaving the scripting for a wee while to just try and make things easier on myself. So thank you so much for watching again. Thank you for my Patreons, as always, for making this possible. And thank you also for Squarespace. And I will see you soon for another video. And remember, books save lives, so keep reading.